truck for people who tell me how I was supposed to behave in a concentration camp, who only know of concentration camps by reading or having talked to someone. Mrs. Dr. Davidovitz, among others, I have no truck for. Or the German lady, the psychologist, philosopher, what's her name, who accused us survivors that if we have survived, we must have done something wrong in order to make survival.
Hannah Arendt?
That's the one, Hannah Arendt. I have no truck for her. Luckily for her, in my case, she's dead now. I have nothing good to say about, because that's a lady who got out in 1936 or something out of Germany. And people like that should not point fingers. I mean, that's the last ones who should point fingers, especially at ones like us who've made it out. To me, these people, as far as I'm concerned, the Arendts, the Davidovitzes, all the others, they made the Holocaust into a business, rather than in really trying to find out by talking. They have made many conclusions based on another scholar who wrote a book, and another scholar who wrote a book. You know, remember, what we're doing here now didn't exist 40-odd years ago. And 40-odd years ago, when somebody wanted to talk about the Holocaust, they shunted them to the side.
Right.
You know, hey, we don't want to talk to you. We don't want to know about it at this time, okay? We don't. Forget it. Go in the corner. Stand there with a dunce cap. When money was to be made, or honors were to be made, then we became important. And as far as I'm concerned, the Holocaust has become a business. And I resent it very much. And it has been an honor-gathering scheme for certain professional scholars. And I resent that very much. Contrary to what is being claimed by the homosexuals, they were never gassed. Never. They were never selected.
Were you intermixed with homosexuals?
Yes.
You were.
Homosexuals in most of the camps where I was always, or nearly always, had jobs in the hospital.
Were they having jobs in the hospital when you were there too?
And they were never gassed, they were never selected. And I get very angry when I hear them say it. You know, our people were gassed. That's as big a falsehood as ever existed. Even if you were Jewish and you got into the camp as a homosexual, you were spared the gassing because you were really there with a pink triangle. That's the kind of German absurdism is the word.
Speaking of that, I was wondering why they even went to so much trouble to maintain you in the hospital when the goal was for you to die in the first place.
Because, you know, the psychology and the mentality of a German is that as long as a person wants to live, you know, they're going to give him that chance. In many ways. Again, this is the psychology at work here now. You're in the selection. And when the guy feels on the other side that you have that drang, he's floored by it. He can recognize himself in you. So he's not going to deny you. It's always the meekling that is the first one who gets hurt, no matter what society you're in. Doesn't have to be German, doesn't have to be Austrian. Wherever you reflect to the other guy that you're willing to bow and that you are meek, you're going to get kicked. You're going to get hit, and you're going to get killed. History, the literature is full of books like that. That will tell you the same story from the medieval ages, from early Israel. Well, hell, the Bible has it. It's nothing new. It's the same thing there. Yes, they want to do away with Jews. But they always said, too, that as long as a Jew can work, they want to have him kill himself. We'll give him the opportunity to work for us until he dies. Homosexuals were pink.
Mm-hmm. But were there any Jews wearing a homosexual triangle?
I do not know of any, okay? That I cannot answer you on.
Okay. Well, that brings me to my next question, which is, were you aware of any sexual abuse
Yes.
of the prisoners?
Yes. Usually by fellow prisoners.
In the blocks?
Yeah. And also by homosexuals. And I'm personally aware of it.
Okay. By homosexuals wearing the triangle, you're
Yeah.
saying pink triangle. You're personally aware of it as in you were a victim or
Mhm.
others you knew? You too were a victim. Is there any more you would want to...
No, that's why I don't have much cause for what they are saying about them having been sufferers. The homosexuals were never selected for gas chambers,
Mm-hmm.
contrary to what they've been proclaiming. There was no selections among homosexuals ever. If they died of hard work, which most of them didn't do, because most of them that I'm aware of were working in hospitals as orderlies or things like that. They too had a social structure within the camp where they took care of one another.
You say the abuse was by other prisoners. Were they the prisoners you're saying, the homosexual with the triangle, or not your equals in the prison block? I'm asking.
I don't understand quite your question.
Okay. You said often the abuse was by other prisoners.
Yes.
Okay. Were these prisoners in a higher political position than you, or just
Yes.
your equals in the block?
You have the same thing again. We're now talking about homosexuals and not other fellow prisoners. Okay?
Okay, the homosexuals who were wearing the triangles or
The
something.
pink triangle. That's what they wore.
Okay.
They, when the opportunity presented themselves, were trying to initiate other non-homosexuals into their behavior.
I see.
This to me is abuse.
Mm-hmm.
It was usually done by people who had control over your actions and thereby were able to foster that behavior. This is why I have very little truck for them, even today. All the public advertising that they have done is self-serving, and I know a little bit more about them under the dire circumstances, and they don't come out well.
Amongst, say, the block elders or other groups in the hierarchy, were women provided?
Women were not provided into the camp. In Auschwitz, there was a bordello. And if you read Lex, he goes into very great detail about that because he knows much more about it than I do. I've seen the women sit on the fences, on the windowsills. Okay? Block eldesters and Stuben eldesters and other such high society people could obtain chits that they could trade in for 20 minutes with a forced prostitute, because none of these girls were prostitutes. In real life, they all volunteered in order to get out of the dirty work that they did. Most of them were girls from the Balkan areas, Yugoslavia, Italy, or the groupings of the southern nations.
Why?
I don't know. I guess maybe they have a freer attitude about it. I don't know. They saw something. But that's how they got women, and only by chits. There have been numerous incidents that I have seen myself, not too often, where we saw bed sheets hanging out of the window where a guy had spent the night, which he was not supposed to do, and had climbed out at very early in the morning to go back to duty, and somebody forgot to pull the sheets in. So I have seen this myself. I mean, so there is humor in the camps. Contrary to what people think, there is humor. You cannot survive this ordeal if you don't have a sense of humor.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have a sense of humor, your chances of survival are far greater than those whose attitude is always on the negative side. If you can find a whiff of humor in a condition that you see, I think you stay more balanced.
Absolutely. In fact, as we ended last time, you had brought that subject up, and I'm wondering, do you have anything more you want to say, or can you relate any humorous incidents?
Well, for instance, we were talking, I think, about the cabaret.
That subject came up, yes. Go ahead.
All right. Where I was one of the MCs, And we were given strict instructions, no political jokes about the Nazis, and you can't sing any songs that are anti-Nazi, and you cannot make any jokes about Nazism and things like that. So you had that limiting factor, and within that you worked. And I think I told you, maybe I didn't, but if it isn't, I'll duplicate myself. On Christmas, we went to the women's camp in Birkenau, and which was an experience, lucky for us, we didn't have to duplicate, because by that time, in January, everybody left, or actually they began to start leaving in October of 1944, the first transports went out. The torment of that particular evening was very painful for us, because most of us were Dutch in the cabaret, and we dealt with a lot of the Dutch women who had survived that long, like we. And the questions that came to us were, our husband, this, blah, 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 became a very tormenting one for us. And Lex and I remember we talked about it during the camp, and even after we saw each other again years later, how we said, this was one of the biggest goddamn mistakes we ever made, to go there. We thought we were going to do a great favor and lift these women's spirit a bit. He said, it really was bad for everyone concerned. We walked home about the poor women. The women were glad to see us, couldn't care less about the music. They had other things on their mind, and it was a total screw-up in that sense. There was no humor in it. This was the one of the nadirs of the experience of being in that cabaret. Okay, we gave a lot of good times to our fellow prisoners in the camp with this thing. And remember, the ones who came on Sunday afternoons, everybody could come. The first couple of rows were always reserved for the SS and for the social structure people. So the other prisoners could come, and the ones who came usually were the savvy ones. They felt if they got there, they were less likely to be picked up on the street by some stray SS-man who had a drink too many and wanted to do something. So, it paid for itself, except that one day that one evening to Birkenau.
So that was the antithesis of the humor.
There was no humor. I mean, there wasn't even an antithesis. I mean, this was a nadir. We went out there with good feelings. We're going to do this for these women. We're going to have a hell of a lot of fun. Hopefully they will accept it. And it just turned exactly against it. It's like nothing went right that afternoon. I mean, it was the pits.
You said early on that quickly you had to stop thinking about the past if you were going to survive.
Yeah, that I was told that.
Yes.
That was the advice given me.
Did you follow this?
Absolutely.
Yes.
I stayed away from the Dutch as quickly as I could, because they would get together at night after work and sit there and talk about things in Amsterdam, what they ate, where they went to this, and they went to this whole memory thing. And this is exactly what that person had told me. He said, forget about this, because you're not going to make it if you're going to be that hung up on it. And so I totally moved myself away from the Dutch. I quickly began to learn German, which I didn't know, and Polish, and whatever language that could help me, I started to absorb. It's not Menko is the name of that fellow, Bill Menko. When I came into the hospital, and then Lex van Weer arrived from the coal mines, that's the first time I had met up with a Dutchman. And then he introduced me to Bill Menko, because that was the other Dutch, and there were the only three on that floor or in that building, and there were a lot of Dutch women in Block 10 there in the experimental block, so that's how we met. Before that time, and he came, I think in his book he says he arrived in January 1944 into the hospital, and I had been there already since August, so I was an old-timer by now. And I had stayed away from Dutch as much as I could. And I think in many ways that helped me to survive, that I was not drawn in to this memory scene, this constant pestering of oneself, looking back rather than I got to think of tomorrow, and if I make it to tomorrow, then I got to think of the next day, and that kept me going. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm. Throughout that time, though, did you ever find yourself giving way to despair?
You know, it's an interesting question because I cannot recall. I've been through selections in the hospital four times at least that I can count, plus the one when I arrived. And each time I made it because of my will to live and overpowering psychologically the doctor making the selections. And I can still feel the highs that I had, okay? That I stood there naked and so hot. I mean, every end piece of the nerves was tingling. And as I said, you know, I always say to people, I was hanging from the ceiling. My head was at the ceiling. They had to pull me down. I was that high. I had licked those sons of a bitches. And that's a high that is an incredible experience. And it's like your whole metabolism, everything is working at once. And it takes hours to subside and come back to normalcy. And then, of course, the girls across the street would know that there was a selection, and the questions came up through the open windows. If the windows were open, everybody made it, that sort of thing. And, you know, I cannot remember, and this is one of these weird things. You know, I'm a chronic sufferer of migraine headaches ever since I was 4 years old. I cannot remember a single migraine while I was a prisoner, which means only one thing, that I was so high-keyed all the time, I had no time to be triggered down. I had to be alert all this time. Now, I'm 66, and doctors will tell you, you know, when you get to be over 60, your migraine should disappear. Bull. I still have them. But I lead a much more relaxed life, and I have time for the triggering down. So I figure, you know, by the time I die, I'll probably die with a migraine. You know, and curse the doctors for having said I was going to be without it. But I cannot remember of a single one.
So there was like almost a hierarchy in your body.
That's right. And this is, again, the point I've tried to make to people, and they don't understand it because they've never experienced. And when I talk to a fellow ex-prisoner, you have to say 1-2 words and we understand one another, and we have to say no more words. Because something happens to you, and I don't think it is prisoners alone. I think this is also the case with people who survive major air crashes or who are on lifeboats when a ship has gone down. I think they go through that same thing, that's all of a sudden their total mental alertness and keying of their system, and, you know, to survive this. And those who have it will, and those who can't go overboard or die on the mountaintop. There's enough literature on this, I believe, to substantiate what I'm saying here based on my own readings. And I find this very significant, that it does not happen per se in a concentration camp as we experienced. I don't know if this happens in jails, because jails are an entirely different thing. You know, people are in jail because they did something. Most of the people who were in the concentration camp didn't do a damn thing.
But perhaps you're talking about facing death every day.
No, I don't think so. I think there is a stronger constitution there. You see, a person in an American jail is as secure as they will ever be.
No, I agree, but I mean the people in the camps, on the lifeboats.
Okay, in that sense, I buy that, yes. I mean, you know, the most relaxed life is being in an American prison with TV, you know, with whatever you want to do, all the cigarettes that you want, you know, 3 meals a day, a little bit of work. You know, I mean, it's absurd. So
the lesser diseases went away in the face of this.
That's the only disease I had, was this chronic migraine business. I may have had a toothache, and, you know, and again, you know, you push to the side. I mean, this is another great thing that man has, that he can narcosize himself. And I don't think this is probably not the proper word to use, narcosizing. Come to think of it, it's a very poor way. Everything is sized these days, but you can give yourself mental sedation. I'm convinced of that, except when the pains become so excruciating. When I arrived in Mauthausen, for instance, I was beaten so severely by prisoners, because when they came off the train after the ordeal of the overnight 3 days or 4 days and 3 nights in these open freight cars in the midst of the winter, everybody was dead around me. And I came out of that car and they could see I had been a prominent one on the clothing. I had an overcoat and the whole thing. I had survived. And I got so severely beaten, I can remember that one guy saying, "You son of a bitch, you're not going to be a prominent one here. That's our job." And I'm convinced that I had a brain concussion. I do not remember nearly my entire stay in Melk, the concentration camp Melk in Austria. I remember going out there on freight, on a truck. I remember leaving there on the bar just to go to Linz when we start walking towards Ebensee. I hardly remember my existence in Melk. So I must have been working off that brain concussion. I must have worked someplace. I have no recollection. People have asked me, "Do you remember the tunnels?" I said, "What tunnels?" They said, "You went every day to the tunnel." I said, "I don't remember a damn thing."
So your body took over and walked every day?
Yes, I was in a dope state. I did my routines, and beyond that, I don't remember a damn thing. And I have a very good friend who was in Melk. We didn't know each other in Melk, who has described things, who has a very clear memory. And he said, "Don't you remember that?" I said, "No." "Don't you remember?" "No." He said, "What do you remember?" Just what I told you now. Arriving there and leaving there. It's weird.